once again, a very big welcome to all of our attendees this morning. To start off with, I have had some requests about the registers and checklist toolbox talk that we had last week. We are still getting a lot of those emails out. They are quite big emails with all those templates that are going through. If you have not received it as yet, you will definitely receive it within this week. We are just sending out a number of emails with the COVID-19 packs as well. And I think this is just taking up a little bit of extra time. So we do apologize if you haven't received it as yet. We're sorry for the delay, but we guarantee that you will receive this information if you have requested it. Now, if you have maybe asked for the COVID-19 presentation, perhaps some of you were not available last week, Thursday, when we went through COVID-19 and the return to work for those who are under level 3 or level 4 and continuing to work throughout this level 3 time frame. We just wanted to let you know that you do have this available in PDF. We can send this out to you along with the regulations, and we are going to do a very small or mini presentation as we did last week Thursday, just to recap on what is needed for each and every plumber out in the industry, small business, medium business, to get back to work, especially some of that have already started yesterday. We just want to guide and assist you in ensuring that you are working safely during this time. So that is what we are going to be looking at this morning. On the top right-hand corner of the screen, you will see my email address, chris@ohss.co.za. If you need any information, please don't forget to remind me. Perhaps you have asked me already, and again, I apologize if you haven't received it promptly. We do have quite a number of emails that we are getting through, but as promised, we will make sure you get that information. So for many of you that are going back to work or have already returned to work yesterday, you had to plan your return. You had to make sure that everything that you are doing is in accordance, first of all, with what the government needs you to do. Now, this is obvious because before we return to work, we need to understand, what does the government actually need me to do before I can start operating? A few questions came through. Does the responsibility fall on the employer in order to pay for testing? Does the responsibility fall on the employee to buy their masks? So there were quite a few questions that came through from last week, and we'd like to touch base on some of those questions this morning. But at the end of this toolbox talk, as well as at the end of the presentation that we did last week, the PDF versions of this have those questions as well as the answers attached to them, and we've answered them as best we can. We also need to understand that regulations sometimes outline specific requirements that we need to do as South Africans in order to achieve some sort of occupational health and safety within a company. But the regulations are sometimes not very direct, and this vagueness in the interpretation of the regulations sometimes leads to a bit of confusion, and that is why it does take us some time to get back to you in giving you the correct information. We don't just want to say what we think or how we interpret the actual legislation. We want to get as many people as possible, those industry professionals out there, so that we understand exactly what it is you need. And then when we give you an answer, you know, you can take that and really implement it into your company. So two of the other things that you needed to do, aside from having the government issued regulations and directives, was to know what your own policies and procedures were going to be. Now, obviously, a lot of the COVID-19 packs that are being sold out there, or those given out free of charge from ourselves, have basically taken the directives and the protocols that are in all the mandated regulations that have been sent out from the government, and we just design them into our own policy and procedure. And those Word documents, as we mentioned, are given out to you so that you can edit them. If you did not edit them, you use them as is. Just make sure you do understand what is in that document so that you can implement it. But if you are designing your own policies and procedures, one of the things that we want to encourage you to do is keep up to date with the latest regulation versions. For one, the latest regulation version that came out on vulnerable employees was version 4 that came out about a week ago. And this version helps us to understand who is vulnerable and what must we do for those employees who are categorized as a vulnerable employee. Now, it's not just 60 years and over. Because there is so much unknown about the virus, the government had to institute certain other control measures for what vulnerable basically means for an employee. Now, if you want those regulations, or if you've gone through them and you're not too sure how to understand them, please remember, as an IOPSA member, you do have free consulting from ourselves. So drop me an email, give me a call, send me a WhatsApp message, send me your questions, and I'll make sure to try and answer you as best I can. The last thing that we needed to do within our planning phase was to ensure continual safety. And this is where not just the implementation phase comes in, but the continual implementation, development, and monitoring of the protocols that are set out from government side, as well as our personal policies and procedures, are kept up to date and up to standard all the time. Now, we mentioned last week that we should do this in phases, and those 3 phases will help you to get started safely, work safely, and then keep yourself as well as your clients continually safe. Now, we're not too sure how you are going about your policies and procedures, but one of the things that we recommended was having a COVID-19 team. And that means management should get involved so you know what is happening on the ground floor, because it is also the resources and information that comes from your hand as well as your direction that will encourage and move the training, education, and the entire plan ahead. And that is what we really want. This will also allow for the entire training experience and awareness of how to prevent COVID-19 to be a lot more effective. Now, even though what we discuss in the law sometimes does not pertain to you, as we did mention, for those of you who are under 10 employees, there are certain things that you don't have to do that we've said we recommend you do. Now, we're not saying that you have to take on extra work when it's not necessary. What we are saying is rather have more than what you need should something go wrong, especially when we've already done the research for you and we've designed the document for you, and all it needs to be done is implemented, trained, and then understood from your perspective as well as the employee that is possibly being appointed or being given those protocols. So you might ask yourself, well, why is there so much involved in getting back to work? I mean, really, the economy requires us to do so much just to return an earning, now compounded on top of us in trying to find more work again. And one of those questions that came through was, how do small businesses really cope with all of this? And it is a very good question, one that is very difficult to answer. Another question that came through was deep cleaning prior to our return. Why must this be done if the bacteria doesn't last so long on surfaces, especially since we haven't been back to work in so long? Well, for one, it is a requirement by the Department of Health. But secondly, let's just think of this from a perspective of that entire office, the building, wherever it is that you're going to be working out of, laying dormant and having the possibility not just for COVID-19, but for other bacteria and viruses to thrive. We mentioned that COVID-19, being the current pandemic, is not just the only thing that we are dealing with. We also have to take into consideration the Occupational Health and Safety Act. And there, under Section 8, it says that an employer must ensure that his employees remain safe during work. Well, how do we do this if our work area is not clean? Basic hygiene and housekeeping should be one of the essential factors to returning to work. The deep clean side was required in order for buildings, specifically in public places. So we're not talking about your private office here. If you're working at an office, we're talking about a public place. There is a requirement to have an Annexure C. So if you're inviting public to your premises, then there's an Annexure C document that needed to be signed off by someone who's going to fog or disinfect, specifically if they're going to be using pesticides in order to kill the bacteria in that area. However, if you yourself are doing this full deep clean for your own personal spaces, please just make sure that you're using the right ingredients and in the right way. Now, we'd like to stop there and say, that's all fair and well, if you are doing it yourself. But here's the question: do you have a safe working procedure for how to go about performing this clean? Have you taken into consideration what PPE is needed? Have you taken into consideration if anybody needs to be trained on the cleaning? Now you might say, well, Chris, you're going a bit far here. Why is that actually needed? Well, any task that is to be performed in a working environment needs to be understood correctly. And if there is any question as to whether it was done correctly, you need to have some sort of backing or proof that it was done. So let's take something as simple as disinfecting your office. That would be using household bleach in a bucket of water, a mop, perhaps some rubber gloves, some microfiber cloths, and you are going in to disinfect all the surfaces, the floors, the windows, the handles of your working environment. Let's say something goes wrong and someone gets hurt or burnt by that chemical, particularly the bleach, which can become very dangerous. How would you prove that you knew exactly how to use it? Well, you could say it's general knowledge. You should know how to do it. Well, in that case, the government would say to us that we should know how to be safe and ensure that our offices are clean prior to COVID-19. But they didn't do that. They gave us specific directives, a legislation, a regulation, as well as a protocol to follow. So a very simple A4 one-page document on how to clean using water and household bleach, what PPE needs to be used for that in a little separate block, and then a very simple safe working procedure or method statement, um, making sure that you put the cap back on the bleach, making sure that it is not leaking or placed in the correct area, out of reach of children if you do have them in your private homes or at your buildings. If not, make sure they are in a cupboard where it can actually be closed, but also in an area that is well ventilated. And then actually performing the cleaning. Now, it's a very simple document. Having everybody sign that, should something go wrong, you have something substantial to say, well, it is general knowledge, but we also have it documented in order to protect not just yourself, but also the employees that are using those items. Now, again, as we mentioned, you might say, well, we feel it's over and above. However, at OHSS, we've already designed documents like this. It's already there for you to read, sign. It will take you 5 minutes to go through it as a small toolbox talk prior to cleaning. Why not take advantage of that? Don't take the pressure on yourself. We are trying to alleviate it for you. So when it comes to questions like these, as well as some other requirements, such as the legislative requirements of phase one, arranging your workplace so that you have social distancing. Many people are selling big barrier systems and things like that in order to give you social distancing. But if you go to the spa, you just see normal tape on the floor, and that's pretty cheap. So it doesn't mean that you have to spend your entire budget, of which we actually don't have, to implement these protocols. There are simple things that you can do in order to ensure you have physical distancing, social distancing, or even barriers between yourself and the other person. Now, one of the questions many came up with was, why do we have to have the physical barrier, such as the perspex or glass, between myself and another employee? Well, look at what the law says. Arrange the workplace to ensure that employees are at least 1.5 meters apart, or place physical barriers between them, which means you can choose to either separate your employees to ensure they are 1.5 meters apart, or you can place physical barriers between them. And a physical barrier, it's not specifying what type of barrier you need to use, as long as that barrier will prevent the spread of an aerosol or microbiological, how can I put it, if you're speaking and it spits over to the other person. That's just what you basically want to stop. Now, if you're 1.5 meters apart, you don't need that physical barrier. So another question that came through was, how is it possible that we are in a office, a ceiling, a confined space, we can't always work 1.5 meters apart? Now, do I have to carry around this piece of glass or perspex with me? Well, not at all. What other type of physical barrier do you think can stop that spread of that aerosol? Well, a face mask, for one, will stop you from contacting someone else, and a face mask for yourself will stop the other person from getting it from you. A face shield does a very similar thing. So PPE then becomes a very important tool. If you cannot have a solid barrier between yourself and the employee, or the 1.5 meters, but it is still a barrier, a physical barrier. That is why it is vague, but it is also allowant for certain, not leniencies, but for changes in how we are permitted to implement these protocols. So there are other things that we need to do, ensure that our employees understand and know what to do if they are contacted by someone who may be showing signs and symptoms. Perhaps the screening. We have gone to a few companies where we've done audits to ensure that they are compliant to COVID-19 protocols. And the questionnaire that they have, the little screening protocol, does not have all the questions that the directives outline. Now, again, we've designed one for you. It's free of charge. It's in Excel spreadsheet. You can change it the way you want it. But what we want to do is refrain from asking the question, are you sick? Because that is a bit vague. We need to ask, are you showing the following symptoms? And then list the symptoms. Let the employee read and understand what those symptoms mean for them. And if they are showing any of the symptoms, we are not saying they have to show all the symptoms. If they are showing any of those specific symptoms, then please, they need to self-isolate and get themselves the medical attention that they need. So these are the things that need to be provided for before going back to work. You also need to provide hand sanitizers, clean running water and soap, as well as disinfectants to sanitize their workstations. Ensure that they actually use them. Now, how do you ensure it? As we mentioned, you can do a formal training of the actual plan and protocols that are set out, but why not provide the posters, again, that we've already designed for you, laminate them, put them up in various areas where employees can see, where it says wash your hands, how to wash your hands, how to stop the spread of COVID-19. These posters are widely available on the internet as well. So there's a lot of other measures that need to be taken, including a risk assessment, policies and procedures, training of staff, aside from just the screening for COVID-19. And all of these things need to be documented, communicated to employees, as well as signed for, to ensure they know and understand what needs to be done. So you might think to yourself, well, this is such a lot of work, as well as moving over to monitoring everything. Well, on an administrative side, one of the suggestions that we said was appoint a COVID-19 compliance officer. This is in terms of section 16.6a. Section 16.5 also says that this person is there to supervise and assist with the promoting of those protocols and checking whether it is actually being adhered to. But if you are 1 to 10 employees, you don't need this person. But think just in general health and safety. In fact, with general monitoring of a company, aside from health and safety, would it not be a very good idea to appoint someone who knows and understands how this works, how your protocols work, how the social distancing is such a wise and good idea, how to wash hands, how to promote and give awareness to employees? Why not appoint that person? And it's not to police anyone, it's to guide, it's to assist and oversee the protocols that you are wanting to put in place. And then they can assist you in handling COVID-19 in your workplace. Perhaps they can also assist you in informing the Department of Labor should somebody show the COVID-19 virus, perhaps that they've actually been infected with it, and now you need to implement other forms of protocols to stop the spread in your private capacity. Then remember, these are also the types of persons that can help with the training and awareness. They also can assist those who are not adhering to the protocols such as social distancing. Now, we're not saying take all this responsibility and put it on one person, and that is why we mentioned one of the recommendations is to have a COVID-19 team. And this person can then just be the head of that team, assisting your company in making sure you've got everything in place. Some of the other things that you are doing, as we mentioned earlier, is those physical barriers. Remember, it's not necessary if you're adhering to social distancing, but it becomes necessary if social distancing is not a possibility at all times. Please ensure that temperature testing is done with your screening, and ensure that those screening, when you do symptom screenings, it needs to be the correct questions as outlined by those protocols. And then your disinfectants, your sanitizers, as well as various changes to your working environment that will need to be done. Now, if it comes to rotation of the working environment, perhaps somebody coming in on a Monday and a Tuesday and others coming in on a Wednesday and a Thursday, that is really up to you. Perhaps you can allow them to work from home. It is all dependent. The government is not saying specifically what you must do and what you must not do. You must just ensure that you can still include social distancing, physical barriers, sanitizing for all of your staff, taking into account any person that may be vulnerable. Please ensure that you have the correct PPE as well as hygienic facilities for your employees to use. Take into consideration technology such as printers, phones, elevators, where people need to touch all the time. These things become frequently touched or high touch risk points where we do not want to cross-contaminate or create the spread of the COVID-19 bacteria through constantly touching technology. So if you have biometrics, which is a fingerprint scanner, perhaps this needs to be swapped out for a card system where each individual has his own personal card instead of having to touch a physical scanner with their finger every single time. This becomes extremely difficult to stop the spread. Then client and visitor management. What can you do to ensure that they are protected? Well, if they are your client coming to your site, you are allowed to ask them to be screened. If you are going to your client's premises, they are allowed to ask you to be screened. If you're visiting them at your private premises to go out and do a call out for perhaps a burst geyser or some sort of other work that needs to be done, you can ask them those questions, but please remember that they are not at liberty to disclose any medical conditions. But at the same time, you also have the requirement of declining to go in should they not answer you to the degree that you wanted. In other words, if they're saying we haven't been tested and we actually don't know if we are COVID-19 positive, you can refuse to go in there. So please just remember that. Then also attendance and absence management of your working environment. Please check on all of those who may be absent for the day. If they are sick, perhaps they have not said anything and they need to get medical treatment as soon as possible. So we don't want to take too much more time. We just want to go through a quick few steps. Remember, you do have this available on PDF. You can just drop me a mail and we will also give you the full PDF of what we discussed last week, Thursday. But here are some of the things that you should do. Prepare a plan, outline what the procedures are, train and educate your staff, clean, make sure you've got good hygiene, then daily screening with the correct form that has the correct questions, ensure you've got your PPE, masks and face shields, ensure your employees are being given hand sanitizer as well as correct disinfectant for all of the surfaces. If you can, abide by the social distancing of 1.5 meters. Otherwise, you put up physical barriers between your employees. As again, we mentioned, you can use the face shields. Then again, cleaning, disinfection, housekeeping. This should become a regular priority of any workplace. Ventilate the workplace, get that fresh air to keep getting pumped into your working environment. Appoint a compliance officer. make sure you've got all those special arrangements for vulnerable employees, and then monitor and keep your records. If it is documented, you've got the proof. And this is really to help you stay safe, to help you prevent the spread of the COVID-19 bacterial virus, and it essentially help us get back into a normal working routine like we were pre-COVID-19. Obviously, it has changed a lot of the way we work. It's probably not going to go away for a very long time. So we ask you to please continue working toward a safer working environment. Next week, we are going to be discussing fuel, diesel, or petrol, and how this can be considered a hazardous chemical substance and what we should be doing in that instance. We then have a public holiday the week after. We then look at sewers. And finally, for the end of the month, we will be looking at housekeeping, once again, disinfection of our vehicles. So as we mentioned, we do have a couple of questions that we've already had, and we'd like to go through this with you. That's why we're not going to be asking you for any additional questions this morning. But some of the things that were asked last week, Thursday, was what temperature will a person be who could be affected with the virus? Now, for many, they did not show any temperature, and yet they tested positive for COVID-19. Others had a temperature of 40 degrees Celsius, which is quite a high temperature. What we need to understand is that adults typically have a fever if their body temperature increases to 38 degrees Celsius. So if you are on 38 degrees Celsius, this becomes a bit of a concern because that means you actually have a fever. A high-grade fever happens if your body rises to 39.4. So you can see if you're 40, it's a very big concern. That means immediately you need to get medical attention. But even if we are at a temperature of 38, in fact, some companies are saying that if you are 37.5 and above, you are not allowed to enter that area. So we cannot say for sure what is your cutoff mark, but we do need to understand what is the definition of fever. Another question is, why is it necessary to deep clean if our buildings have been empty for more than 72 hours or 3 days? Well, as we mentioned, this is in an effort to ensure that all surfaces where bacteria can thrive, and we're not just talking about COVID-19, that is included in bacteria, but we are ensuring that the entire area is disinfected. We know that COVID-19 does last for a few days on some surfaces, and thus the need for a deep clean to be performed. But as a requirement from the Department of Health, we are required to ensure deep cleaning and sanitization of all our areas and surfaces. And then, as we mentioned, a very good question, as a small business, how do we cope with all of this? Well, it is a good question, and as we said, not a very easy one to answer. Work together, find opportunities, possibly where plumbers can work together on projects to maybe assist each other and go in half-half. I don't know if that can work for you. I guess this is the type of question that many will ask, and to be honest, I myself am a small business, so we are just trying our best to give our clients the best service at a better price than we used to give before, just so that we can survive and so that our clients can get started. And that is what our current focus is. So take it or leave it. It's really up to you how you get your business started. But you do have the backing of OHSS to give you the needed resources that you require. Now, we don't have time for some of the other questions this morning, so we want to say thank you very much for joining us. There are quite a few questions, as you'll see there on your screen, but what we want to do is give this out to you in PDF format and then allow you to ask additional questions if you need. So that's all the time.